Although the police system is crucial for the protection and safety of American citizens, ultimately, some aspects of the police system are urgently in need of reform due to much too frequent occurrences of excessive force, a lack of accountability, and disputable hiring standards. The first issue is the too frequent occurrences of police brutality, or excessive force. This issue has been especially prominent lately here in America. One important thing to note is that this issue isn't even necessarily about racism, it's about police brutality as a whole against all people. The problem boils down to this: excessive violence is being used in situations that is not required. I understand that there are tense situations where policemen cannot control everything, but isn't that what they train for? If they can't deal with these situations, more training is needed, which I'll go more into later. There's just too many instances of police brutality for it to simply be random or a coincidence. Over 1,000 people are killed by the police every year. That's a lot, and it doesn't even include non-fatal instances of excessive violence, of which there would be many more. I think that anything we can do to reduce that number should be done. One recent example of police brutality was the George Floyd killing. A cop, Derek Chauvin, knelt on the neck of George Floyd for over 8 minutes as a crowd of people told him he was dying, and as Floyd himself said, "I can't breathe." What was he killed for? A possible counterfeit $20. You can talk all you want about what kind of people the victims of police brutality were, what they'd done in the past, etc. But when it comes down to it, should they have died that day? No, they shouldn't have. You might argue that there's just a few bad cops in the police force, just a few bad people. That might be so, but when the rest of the good cops won't report or turn in the bad cops, it's a big problem. Even if these occurrences are limited, there needs to be consequences for the people involved. That leads me to my next point. As long as people have agency and the freedom to choose, ultimately people are going to make bad decisions. I understand that. It's part of being here on Earth. What's the issue is when there's no significant consequences for those actions. It's terrible that these instances of police brutality are being committed in the first place, but it's even worse when there's no accountability for those actions. Cops are being treated as if they're above the law when no one should be above the law. The reality is that it's hard to hold police legally accountable for any kind of misconduct, including excessive violence. Using the annual rate of around 1,000 people being killed by the police every year, at least 15,000 people have been killed by the police since 2005. Since 2005, only 110 law enforcement officers nationwide have been charged with murder or manslaughter. Of that 110 cops, only 42 were convicted. So of over 15,000 police killings since 2005, only 42 cops have actually had serious consequences. So typically, officers are not even charged for a killing. When they are, they're rarely convicted. Many police departments process complaints internally. Accountability is unreliable when cops are being policed by other officers. They're not being judged by an impartial or unbiased judge. There needs to be more neutral and unbiased groups of people in charge of processing these complaints. The last thing I want to talk about is the hiring standards of police. Part of the problem is their lack of training. On average, 672 hours of basic training is required to join the police force. It takes 1,500 hours on average to get a license to be a barber. No offense to barbers, but the police really have a more important and harder job. Doesn't it make sense that they should have more training? With this amount of training, it's not reasonable to expect the police to always uphold the law, keep people safe, and deal with tense situations. More thorough training is needed before they should be hired. Their training should include things like implicit bias, problem solving, mediation strategies, and de-escalation tactics. All this would help police more effectively deal with hard situations. Another issue is that officers that were fired for misconduct, being unfit for duty, things like that, are being rehired by other police forces or even the same police force that fired them in the first place. Part of this is due to a lack of an accurate database with up-to-date records on police backgrounds, which makes it hard to do data checks and background checks. And part of it is due to the fact that some police forces are willing to overlook or ignore parts of a record as they hire. So, first off, the actual hiring standards of the police force need to be raised. I realize that to many people, being a cop is not a desirable job due to a variety of factors. Part of the way this could be fixed is by increasing the job salary. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, making the job pay more will make more people want the job, which increases job competition. More job competition means the police have more people to choose from as they hire so they can find better candidates for the job. The police is one of the most important jobs in America, so it should be paid like so. Second, a more accurate database of police records is needed, both so they can be held accountable and so the records can be more thoroughly reviewed when they are hired. It's hard to judge police brutality and accountability when we don't even have accurate or thorough records of it. A nationwide database would help us understand the situation more and decide what needs to change. Why should we be satisfied with things the way they are when they can be improved? Limiting instances of excessive force, creating higher accountability, and improving hiring standards are all realistic and attainable goals. I don't know all the solutions to these problems, but I know that when all of us work together, we can figure it out. Humans are constantly striving to progress. This is just the next step. Police reform is not about making something new. It's about making something that's already good better. Thank you.